What I'd like to now do is go into some case studies, and we have 4 of them that I'm going to cover. The first of these regards 4-aminopyridine. This compound is actually a drug substance from which Regis owns the drug master file. And as we were working on this project, the regulatory agency became aware of impurities that were known to possibly be formed in the synthesis. And what was really happening is that as our project was evolving in development, the industry was also evolving in concern over potentially genotoxic impurities. So that somewhere in the middle of this registration exercise, the FDA actually said that although there are 2 impurities here, although they were formed in some early lots, our synthesis knowledge enabled us to eliminate them, and we were always able to make material then subsequently where those impurities would be present at less than 0.1%, which was excellent. However, the agency flagged these 2 impurities as potentially genotoxic, and it was upon Regis to come up with an assay that was significantly more sensitive than the typical 0.1 spec or a 0.05% limit of quantitation. Again, this is due to alerting structural components. Also importantly, from what I understand, the agency probably used some of that software that I talked about in a previous slide to determine whether or not these might be of toxicological concern. And so what Regis did was we analyzed representative lots, we analyzed validation lots, and showed that these were not detected at the new target level. Ultimately, the story ended where we did not actually have to test for these impurities anymore because we showed through diligence and good analytical work that these impurities were less than even the lower limit that was put upon us to determine. Our second case study is about hydrazine. Now, hydrazine is a reagent that's used in a lot of syntheses. And interestingly, in the last couple of years, around 3 or 4 of our customers have given us projects that somehow involved hydrazine. And of course, this is a compound you don't want to have in your final drug substance. I am not completely sure if this is considered a PGI, and yet I do know, at least empirically, it's something that the customers do not want to have in their materials. So hydrazine is the kind of impurity which has a poor chromophore, but one can derivatize it very efficiently and analyze it by chromatographic methods, either HPLC or GC. This is the reaction showing benzaldehyde plus hydrazine forming the benzazolene derivative. And in this next slide, we show that the derivatization is rapid, and it happens 5 minutes or faster. Again, hydrazine has a poor chromophore, but with the benzaldehyde derivative, it's actually quite chromophoric, and you could detect it at 300 nanometers, which also in HPLC terms takes you out of the weeds from other impurities. So it's great for specificity. Of course, the strategy is that you derivatize hydrazine standard and quantitate your samples, which are also derivatized, where the hydrazine impurity, if present, will derivatize. And so you have a weight percent assay that you can use. In the case of hydrazine, one could actually purchase the derivative, so you could look at the method from either mode, using either the pre-derivatized standard or making your own derivatized standard. The HPLC development in our case was never very challenging. It's seen that reverse phase, stationary phase columns could easily separate reagent, derivative, and sample-related components among the several projects that we had done this for. So again, speaking in general terms, our sensitivity was somewhere between 5 and 100 ppm for the projects we got involved in. And spike recovery, which is something you always do need to check, was greater than 90%. In some cases, by the way, we validated such methods. Here is a series of panel overlays showing from top to bottom a diluting agent blank, a derivatized blank, a sensitivity standard, an assay standard, as well as a sample that contained no detectable hydrazine. So moving on to my third case study, it's about a compound called Azide, and its story is very similar to that of hydrazine, where it's a reagent and it could be a problem if present in your material, and it is known to have toxicity. To my knowledge, it is not specified in any PGI guidelines, but as said for hydrazine, our customers do not want this in their materials. So much like hydrazine, this compound can be derivatized. On this slide, we show the derivatizing agent reacting with azide to form the derivative. The derivatizing agent is known as pentafluorobenzobromide, or PFBB. And while azide might have a poor to questionable chromophore, it also has issues with typically eluting near the void, and it's really hard to develop specific methods without interferences. Derivatization in this case takes about 8 hours, and that's really not a concern because the assay is very practical. One could start the derivatization on a given workday, let it even sit overnight, and there seems to be no analyte stability issues with it going longer, where you'd have breakdown products as such. So it's fairly robust for the projects we've worked on. By the way, the extent of derivatization was verified independently via NMR techniques. The strategy, of course, is to take azide and make a standard from it and derivatize it, and then of course you take your sample material, and if any azide is present as an impurity in that, it would be derivatized and you have a weight percent test. The method development, although I'm not going to go into great detail, was a lot more challenging in that our typical C18 and C8 phases were not amenable to separation of the derivative from the reagent. And a phenylhexyl column was, however, very good in making that separation. Maybe not a real big surprise if you think about the structures and knowing how these particular stationary phases work. I'll have an example chromatogram shortly, but I wanted to just show some highlights for a particular proprietary compound. We call it number A, or letter A. We had a 50 ppm azide quantitation limit, a 6 ppm detection limit. Our range was fairly wide at 50 to 1,000 ppm. Spike recovery studies across that range of ppm were in the 90s to 101%, which is excellent. Injection precision was, again, really good. And we had a spectrally pure derivative peak. And we did this for several compounds. And a set of example chromatograms is shown here, where we have a DMSO blank, that was our diluting agent, as well as a derivatized blank, and then a derivatized standard. So the peak that's coming out in this case around 22.6 minutes is our derivative.